everybody. Welcome back to From the Suggestion Box, navigating feedback, the good, the bad, and the say what. I am so honored to have my amazing guest, Nathan Gula, here with us today. His service and volunteering has been a huge part of his life for as long as he can remember. After graduating from the University of South Florida with a double major in psychology and philosophy, he started his professional career as an AmeriCorps Vista, tackling food insecurity in Pasco County. He transitioned from there to the role of volunteer coordinator at Metropolitan Ministries and found his calling and nonprofit niche in volunteerism. Most recently, he completed his graduate certificate in nonprofit management at the University of Tampa and has been promoted to the role of Director of Volunteer Services, overseeing 27,000 volunteers across Tampa Bay. Oh my goodness, Nathan, welcome.
Appreciate it.
So Nathan and I, we met, we both are in Florida, and we were on a panel together, and we were answering questions and having a good old time. And he said something that just stuck out to me and struck me. And I was like, I need to get some information about this, because it was just it resonated with me so much. So we were having this conversation, and Nathan says, well, I'm often the only one in the room. And I was like, what? Okay. And then I was like, well, that's something that I say all the time. But then in the profession of volunteer engagement and managing volunteers, men are the minority. And when he said, I'm often the only one in the room, it just resonated with me, because I always feel like I'm often the only one in the room. So Nathan, let's just kind of start off with that, and then we'll get into how feedback has played into some of that. And sometimes you had said that because you're the only one in the room, sometimes you just don't say anything because you're in a room full of women and you feel outnumbered. Let's have this conversation, please.
Yeah. For anyone who's not familiar in volunteer management, often I go to a training, 20, 30 people. It's either I'm the only guy or maybe there's one other, and I'm like, oh, hey, I see you. It's an interesting dynamic at times. And I definitely found that in hiring. Whenever I get applicants, it's 90, 95% women. That's fine. That doesn't bother me.
So in your opinion, why do you think that is?
I think that when people think about volunteer management, they'll think a lot of those soft skills. They'll think of those good interpersonal skills, very relational. And that tends to be kind of the archetype of someone who works in volunteer management. And I have those. I at least I think I have those. I think we all maybe overestimate our emotional intelligence sometimes. But I think that we as a society maybe think of those skills as being more common in women, or more common for people who identify as feminine. But I think that there's a lot of different opportunity, a lot of ways to look at things differently that sometimes I get to bring, which is really fun.
I love that. So you get to bring up a completely different perspective into the room. So, and in all honesty, right? So your degrees in philosophy and psychology have got to be huge for helping you in this role.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah, I double majored in philosophy and psychology, and I also double minored in political science and gerontology. So I was just kind of all over the place. Oh my gosh.
You're like the quintessential manager of volunteers. Yes.
All the things. So yeah, I think that especially when it comes to asking the important questions and understanding people's motivations, I think it was really key in what my education helped guide me in. But I will say there is no golden path for volunteer management. I think I met someone once who was like, no, I actually went to school for volunteer management. And I was like, I didn't know that was possible.
Right.
Even on my team right now, I've got an anthropology major, a business major, an art major. It's all over the place. And it's just always been the case.
Okay. So with 27,000 volunteers, you just mentioned your team. How many people are on your team that help you manage that?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on how you define the team. I have 6 full-time staff who report to me. I have some in all the different counties that we serve. I also have about usually 5 to 10 interns at one time. And then I also have about 30 volunteer leaders. These are volunteers who work specifically on my team. We have a lot more in the across the organization, but specifically in volunteer services.
Oh, so you
So
have like a team. You have an army. That is
I have an
awesome.
army. Yes.
That
So I have
is
27,000 volunteers, but I have an army behind me that makes that possible.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, so now let's get into like what this whole thing is about, feedback, right? Um, as you're managing 27,000 volunteers or a team of 30, or just as your climb to get to where you are, tell us about some feedback that you received that course corrected you, either like good, bad, or like I said, say what?
I have 2 things that kind of come to mind initially. Um, I kind of give a little context for this first feedback that I received. And I want to explain this in not a way that sounds like I'm, I don't know, like white knighting or, oh, look at me, look how great I am, but yeah, as I mentioned, it's a very female dominated field, which comes with its different challenges. And one of those being that um, just around the corner of my office is the front desk where volunteers first come in and talk. And so I can kind of overhear my volunteer coordinators work up front. At the moment, all of them are female. And this was an incident about 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I was kind of new into the manager role. And I overheard a volunteer making some comments that were a little off color towards one of my coordinators. And so I pulled the coordinator aside and talked with them and realized that this was kind of a recurring issue that was happening. Like volunteers are making sexual remarks, sexist remarks towards them. And because of the position they were in, they didn't really feel comfortable confronting the volunteer,
Mhm.
or felt like they almost had to take that, like, oh, they're a volunteer, like they're donating their time. I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I just have to kind of accept this as part of the job. So after we had that conversation, um, that in some ways I thought of as probably some of the best feedback that I've received, that women in my department didn't feel comfortable either addressing a volunteer or having an avenue to bring up those kind of concerns that women are facing in the workplace. Um, I think especially as a manager, you talk about a lot, you manage processes. And so if there's a systemic issue going on in my department, like there is a process that I can put in place to address those kind of things and allow that feedback to more openly flow. I ended up talking with that volunteer, dismissing that volunteer. And I think where your feedback works is 6 months later, I was onboarding a new staff and she had been talking to the new coordinator that's coming onto the team and said like, oh, if you ever face any of that kind of sexual harassment and inappropriate comments, just tell Nathan he doesn't tolerate that. Like he'll stick up for you. He's in your team. So like
Nice.
it was that kind of thing where it was like, oh, the changes that I make at a systematic level here that you manage within your department really, really matter and can make a difference there.
That is so beautiful. And yes, advocating for your volunteers. And then they are then your best advertisers because they were, right behind, we're like, Nathan's got your back, and there's nothing like that. That's not something that you can, make happen. That has to happen organically, and when people know that you care about them, they'll do anything for you, Fantastic. Okay. So has there ever been a piece of feedback that you've given that you were like, ooh, maybe that didn't go over so well?
Yeah, kind of really feedback that I've given. I will say that very early on when I was a manager, I didn't have much management experience. People were like, Nathan's a great volunteer coordinator. We should promote this guy up. And that was great. But I didn't know what I was doing. So there's this bias in psychology. Sorry, you're going to get this out of me, my degree background.
I love it.
It's called the competence bias, which is that things that we are competent in, we judge people the strictest on those things. It's part of like help maintaining your self-worth, your self-identity. So for example, I describe myself as someone who's really good, strong emotional intelligence. I had a staff member who that was probably their weakest trait, or the area where they struggled the most. And so because of it, early on as a manager, I would just pound this person and just kind of get quite frustrated with them about like areas where they were lacking emotional intelligence. They weren't seeing how the comments they were making were affecting a volunteer, another staff member, our relationship with this organization. And I would get so frustrated and so quick with my feedback. And I think later on, in times of taking a step back, starting to reflect on that, I was like, oh, I'm coming in this very, very hot. I'm coming at this with this bias of this is a skill that I'm good at. And to remind yourself, you purposely create a diverse team. You create a team that fills in the gaps. That person had wonderful strengths that I was not leveraging their strengths to be able to fill in for where this is an area there's a weakness, because that was one of my areas of strength. And so I think that that was something I found early on. Eventually, after some initial conflict and sort of self-reflection on my management style and how I was going to get this person to use some of their other strengths to fill in those gaps, that person ended up becoming my manager. So it shows a lot about what I what I thought and what I knew initially, and then over time I'm like, oh, okay, this is a good acceptance of humility. Yeah.
Oh, ouch! Talk about humble sandwich. Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
But wow, the that's brilliant. And you said just a couple of really amazing things, right? That often people get promoted without giving them the tools to be able to succeed there, right?
Yes.
And so because it's not always just about the work, especially when your promotion comes with, managing other people, right? It's like you might be great at your job, but that doesn't mean you're great at managing people. And so just a note out there, shout out to people who are getting ready to promote people, provide them with management training, provide them with something, because it's almost like you're setting them up to fail. But thank goodness for your degrees, it kind of gave you the wherewithal to be like, let me do some self-reflection and take a look at this. And thank goodness you did, because could you imagine? Especially after that person was made your manager.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, weren't actually made my manager, but I later promoted them to manager when I became director. So
Got it. I thought it was like they were over. I was like,
no, that would have been a real humble sandwich. Yeah. But later on, like that was the person that I was like, I leaned on the most and really thought could be a great manager, which is so funny.
That's awesome. Oh, that's great. What was one of the greatest challenges that you ever had to overcome as a volunteer engagement manager?
Greatest challenges. I will say that how to describe this is like translation. I had a boss back when I was the manager, and I became the director once she left the department, who was very relational. With this interesting mix. She was very relational, but then she was also very like quick and abrupt and like get things done now, like everything's done right now. Pretty much the opposite of me in a lot of ways. I'm like, all right, let's sit on that idea, let's chew on it a bit. I make a policy, but then I'm like, hey, if it's not working, I'm an open book. It's okay to change that policy. I'm much more flexible in my style. I'm also very numbers based. I love sitting down with a spreadsheet, figuring out, oh, if I do this sort of strategy, I had a 4.2% increase in this specific zip code where I'm trying to target it. So, yeah, anyway, I'm not going to go into it. I'm not going to bore you. It bored her to death. She did not have any interest in it. And that's really common in the volunteer management field. You start talking numbers and you're going to see the white glaze over people's eyes. Not interested. I'm a people person. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But we also need a strategy so we can engage more people so you can get all that people personing in. So I think that was one of my early challenges was when I would come in there, I would come in guns blazing with these huge spreadsheets that would break all these things down. And it was essentially like I was talking a different language. It doesn't matter that I was speaking English. It wasn't translating. And so finding ways to take that kind of information and put it into nice little packets for people who are not data people, which is a lot of people in volunteer management. That really allowed me to advocate for the department, advocate for what I was seeing, and make changes before I became the director to be able to make changes within the department, the policy, our strategy for recruiting, all these different other pieces, because I was able to show it in a way that was meaningful, in a way that made sense to someone who maybe wasn't as much in the numbers as I was.
And I'll be honest, you started saying numbers and I just started like my eye just started. I was like, wait. But it's so important because you and I have both been to conferences and things like that where they're like, data is what sells the program. Data is what is often like when we have to advocate for our programs and advocate for ourselves, it's that data, it's those numbers that we have to use to talk to our colleagues, or like if talking, to our fellow colleagues that are parallel with us, as well as when we have to talk up, like to C-suite individuals, sometimes that people stuff isn't a thing, but if you start pulling out data and stats to show why all the people stuff is working, it's so important. It's so important. So that's a really great, you could probably start a side company just doing and providing stats and data for all of us who are just like, like, and not, I like numbers. I like charts and graphs and stuff when they're done. I guess I like the end result of it, right? I like getting the end result and seeing all of it and then making the analysis based on it. But putting the numbers in, that's where I'll get my intern. Put in the numbers, and I just get to play with the strategic stuff. But yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your organization and what your volunteers do in the community.
If I could take just one little step back.
Sure.
I was recently in a training. Brene Brown does Dare to Lead. I don't know if you've heard of it. But there was an amazing quote that I heard in there that I've just stuck with me ever since, where it says, without data, like, we make up our story. So I absolutely love that. And that has been like kind of my calling card in volunteer management, is we make up a lot of stories in volunteer management about what's going on with our no-show rate and why this volunteer did this and da-da-da. And without that data, I think we make up so many stories. And I love that little nugget, and I've always kept that with me. So
I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, I'm using it. Maybe that's what we'll call it instead of the original title. I'm just kidding. We'll see how it plays out.
So to jump into your question, you asked a little bit about my organization, right?
Yeah.
So Metropolitan Ministries, we started back in 1972. Originally, it was 13 churches in downtown Tampa that were all providing services. They were kind of the outreach department of those various churches. And what they kind of realized was they were seeing the same people week after week, month after month, really no long-term success there with the clients they were serving. And so they decided to band together to form all those budgets from all those different churches together to form Metropolitan Ministries. At this present moment, as I mentioned, we serve all across Tampa Bay. So we have locations in Hillsborough as well as Pasco County, and we serve over in Pinellas and Polk and Hernando, kind of all around the Tampa Bay area. And when I talk about our programs, we mostly focus on homeless families. So we have a residential facility. We have a couple hundred families who live with us. And then we also do affordable housing out in the community and run those programs. Most recently, we opened Stable Place, which is just really cool. It's housing where the majority of families who live there are on a specific income-based system. And then for other people in the community, they open it up and charge them the regular market rate. And so doing that allows us to pay for the offsetting cost of all the people who aren't able to afford a full cost of rent. And they're really, really nice apartments. So we serve families with meals, hot meals all across the community, any kind of outreach services you can think of. We're kind of we've got a reputation, a bit of a one-stop shop. Everyone comes to Metro. They're like, oh, have you tried Metro yet? So it's been great. And volunteers are all across that organization. As I mentioned, 27,000 volunteers. I like to state that's a unique number. Sometimes people in volunteer management will count every time a volunteer comes in. I don't do that. It's that as each individual. So it's 27,000 different individuals who came. And it's anywhere from, a family that comes in and serves a couple hours once or twice a year to I've got retirees. I've got George, a great guy from USAA who volunteers like 30, 40 hours a week ever since he retired. So It's everything in between. Yeah.
So are your interns considered volunteers, just out of curiosity?
Yeah. So there's kind of multiple intern programs, if you will. There are ones that are affiliated with we were really lucky to be right next to USF and UT. We're really
Yeah.
positioned between the two universities. So we
Yeah.
do interns through there that are not run through the volunteer program, they're run through HR. We got some specific programs like Bonner and those sort of things. But then we also have interns that are specific to volunteer services, people who are looking for just a little bit of experience while they're in college, but aren't going for an official internship for credit, or a teen internship program that we run. Every summer, we take on about 60 to 80 high school interns, yes. And they work 20 to 30 hours a week with us, each of them, different departments. Yeah.
Fantastic. You guys are doing a lot of really great work up there. It's not ever really weird. Is it? Is it weird sometimes?
Um, it's not for me, but I'm the person who doesn't, I just don't find it odd. I mean, um, I've had a pretty equal mix of male and female friends like my entire life. So it's never been that strange for me. Um, I will, at times the references though can just like, and you kind of accept some of the quote unquote like girl talk that kind of happens. And they're like, oh yeah, whoops, there's a guy in the room. I'm like, yep, here I am.
You're
That's
like,
sort
I'm
of,
still here.
they start talking about monthlies and things like that. And I'm like, all right, yeah. And they're like, oh, whoops, Nathan's here. Yeah, that is it happens 100%.
Oh, so what do you think it would take to get more men in the field? And the reason why I say that, and not to make like a gender specific, I might have to end up editing this out, see how this question comes out. Not to make like gender specific assumptions, but males tend to think more strategically. They tend to think more, like analytically, all those kinds of things. And with the profession being so female heavy, we lack that aspect. Now, not to say that there are women who are not analytical and who love numbers and all that kind of stuff, but you said earlier, you're like nine times out of 10, when you start talking about it, we're like, numbers, what do you think? What do you think it would take to get more men involved in the field, or do you think it even matters?
Yeah, I think that you will, and this may be me being optimistic, I think you'll naturally see more men in the field just over time. I think that as society's expectations kind of change, especially like not becoming so strict about, oh, men are analytical and women are good with interpersonal skills and emotions and those sort of things. I think as those standards sort of change, I think you'll see that shift. I think it also, people don't think of volunteer managers and volunteer coordinators as being men. I think that when I go to hire, even people kind of have this archetype of like it's either a person on their second career, middle-aged woman, or I have like fresh out of college women who are usually looking for those coordinator positions. Um, and I think maybe just people need to think of the position also as something that is possible and that a man would succeed in, that men have these sort of interpersonal skills that are developed, that there is value in the natural kind of gearing towards more analytical side and the number side of things. But yeah, everyone's a different individual, so it's hard to make the sort of broad statements. But I think that until we see people in the field, then it sort of changes our perception. And I think I experience that as I go around. People are just like, "Oh, like you're the volunteer person." I'm like, yeah, I have all these, and they're like, "Do you have other men like in your?" And at one point, I did actually have one other guy I had on the team. I was like, "Oh man, like we're making up a third of the team right now. That's huge."
That is hilarious. Well, I have to say, like, I love just seeing well, number one, it's important for representation, right? And we hear people talk about it often all the time. It's so important to see yourself. But I think like as men see other men, they might be like, oh, because you have your Rob Jacksons, your Barry Altmans, and now like people who are really, contributing greatly to this profession. And I think it's great. I think it's great. And it was funny, something that you said struck me when you were like, for whatever reason, people have this mindset, like if you say volunteer manager, they just automatically think woman. Just like often when you say secretary, people think women, but men can be secretaries, and men can be executive assistants and be wicked at it, just be amazing. So like you said, with society's acceptance of, men do this and women do this, and kind of letting go of some of that, I think it's going to open up doors and create room and create space for people to just be people, and the best people are in those jobs, right? That's yeah.
And I absolutely agree. I think that, when you look at forming a team, and luckily I have a little bit bigger team, so I have a little more flexibility to do that. You always want to try and fill in your weaknesses, fill in the areas where you're not as good at something, and be honest with yourself about that. Like, hey, I don't have this sort of analytical number side, like you talk about, I glaze over. Maybe pull in someone, and they might be a man, they might not be, but pull in someone who has that skill set and that strength. I think that too often we tend to hire people that are either like us or that fit kind of the mold of what we think this position should be like.
Yeah.
And I have been lucky enough that I've been in volunteer management for 7 years now. And even in that time, because I manage a team, I've been able to pull in different people and see the way those different strengths have really made a huge difference in how the department functions, and have had different kinds of success depending on that configuration.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Okay, so we're going to end with this. Are there any last minute tips or anything that you want to leave for your audience?
Oh man. Last minute tips. Oh, okay. Overall, and this, I'm talking in the volunteer management and the nonprofit field, I will say that love numbers, love data, love the story that it tells you. Whatever you can do to like embrace that. If you don't have those skills, find someone who does. It'll just make a world of difference for you. Like it really does change a program. And so when people ask, how did you have this program? It's 27,000 volunteers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of numbers that go into that. There's a lot of strategy that goes into that. And it's so valuable. So yeah. It's
so funny because as soon as you said that, I was like, no, on the inside I died just a little bit, but I'm accepting it, and I'm like, okay, but I was just like, no. But you are so right. You are absolutely right. So I'm going to come up with some strategic plans, but numbers and data. And when I do, I'm going to send it to you. I'll be like, this is because of you. You inspired me. Thank you.
I'm like, how are you measuring it? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. No, it was enough. One step at a time. If anybody wants to reach out to you to get some, great advice about your numbers and things, how can they reach you?
Yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I don't know if you're going to send a link there. And then also my email, nathan.gula@metromin.org. I'm more than happy to talk with anyone. If you're in the Tampa Bay area or anywhere visiting, we got a lot of guests into Tampa. I would love to tour the facility at Metro, show you around. I get to brag about the awesome things that we do. So it's the best part of my job.
Awesome. I wish we would have talked about a month or two ago, because I was actually up in Pasco County.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and your insights. Oh, you dropped some little nuggets. I'm gonna have to go like find out how it all worked out. But thank you so much for your time. And for those who are watching and listening, thank you so much for listening to From the Suggestion Box, navigating feedback, the good, the bad, and the say what. Make sure you click on the button below to subscribe, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you again. Bye-bye.